Hello, everybody. It's good to be back. I took a little bit of time off over the holiday. I hope you had a fantastic time with your friends and family, worshiping whatever deities that you choose to worship. I had a good Christmas, and I got a great Christmas gift by the way of my work being featured in a fairly groundbreaking mainstream article by the Washington Times on Christmas Eve. And that's going to be the topic of what we discuss here. We're going to read through this article line by line, paragraph by paragraph together, and then I'm going to discuss it with you and expound when necessary. So the headline of this article, to begin, states, "Conspiracy theorists see Trump's Space Force as strong evidence of UFO visitors." Good stuff. And a couple of notes on the Washington Times and this author before we move on into the article. If you're not familiar with the Washington Times, it is a fairly large, good circulation newspaper out of Washington, D.C. They're typically conservative in nature. And this article was written by a man named S.A. Miller. Now, it goes to note here that S.A. Miller is the White House reporter for the Washington Times. Keep that in mind as we proceed. So, getting into the article, first line says, President Trump's order to create a military space force gave conspiracy theorists another tantalizing piece of evidence, some say the best yet, that the government is hiding the truth about extraterrestrial visitors. That is quite the line to lead into this article with. Moving on, the idea is that launching the Space Force will be a big step towards the government's acknowledgement of extraterrestrials and technology gleaned from crashed alien spacecraft, what the UFO community calls, quote, full disclosure, end quote. Wow. This is in the mainstream, guys, and that line right there is almost right on the money. And not just that, but they're literally putting the idea of full disclosure out there into the public, as opposed to say partial disclosure? Interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the article. Now, third paragraph, it says, making it all the more real, the Space Force plan pits Mr. Trump against his natural enemy, the deep state within the federal government. The deep state is also the keeper of alien secrets, according to UFO researchers. All the more real, huh? This really doesn't seem like your typical conspiracy smear piece that we would normally expect about topics like this in the mainstream media, right? And again, that is pretty right on the money. So the first three paragraphs here outlining these ideas about the Space Force, the UFO cover-up, that's good stuff right there. I was very surprised when I first read this. Now we're getting into the fourth paragraph. This is when they begin to feature a couple of tweets of mine. Quote, this is huge and something the deep state does not want. Conspiracy theory filmmaker Jordan Sather posted on Twitter after Mr. Trump issued the surprise June 18th order for the Pentagon to start planning a Space Force. Understand that with the Space Force, the advanced technologies, free energy, and anti-gravity kept in secret think tanks within Lockheed, Boeing, and other corporate contractors will now have an avenue to be released publicly. Mr. Sather tweeted. All right, what do I have to say about this? I got a few things to say. Number one, those tweets I made talking about the Space Force, the deep state doesn't want it, the advanced technologies. I mean, they put free energy and anti-gravity, literally those words in this article. Huge. But these tweets that I wrote, I don't even remember writing them. I probably wrote these. I mean, I have to literally read the article to figure out when I wrote them. After June 18th, so probably near the end of June, maybe early July. That's a long time ago. Somebody somewhere either must have had these tweets saved to be used in a situation like this, or they really scrolled through my timeline looking for these to print. That's intriguing. And not just that, calling me a conspiracy theory filmmaker. Again, this is not your typical mainstream smear piece. Now, it goes to note here, I mean, when talking about these sorts of subjects that are often ridiculed or hard-hitting truths that people might not normally believe, if you're going to have a mainstream outlet report on these, it's a very fine line that they're going to have to walk. They're going to have to pander to a mainstream audience somewhat. So when I see the words conspiracy theorists and whatnot, it doesn't trigger me because I understand that. I understand they have to pander to the mainstream audience. But again, they're not discrediting. They're not smearing. They're not doing those sorts of things that we would normally expect, especially about these sorts of topics, right? So I'm really wondering what the motive behind this article was. And remember how I said it was written by their White House reporter? So truly, I'm wondering what sorts of intel was fed to who, where, to get this article published and printed and then circulated around. Very crazy stuff. Now moving on, they feature Dr. Michael Sala's work. Unfortunately, they don't honor him as a doctor in this article, but maybe that was a little bit too much truth, too much validity for their mainstream audience to put. But anyway, it says Michael Sala, an author who promotes theories about secret U.S. space programs and long-time extraterrestrial presence on Earth, noted that Pentagon top brass opposed the establishment of a sixth branch of the military to patrol above the atmosphere. Wow. Again, secret space program. First time I've ever seen it in a mainstream article, and being featured in the Washington Times, too. Serious mainstream outlet. Large mainstream outlet. Moving on. Quote, "It is important to understand that by ordering the creation of a space force, Trump is shaking the bureaucratic and corporate tree that hides the secret space program that the Air Force runs, along with the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency." DIA, a lot more to be said about the DIA in the future in regards to all this, and the NSA, the National Security Agency. He posted on his Exopolitics website. NSA and DIA, huh? If you follow QAnon, those are some pretty interesting three-letter agencies to make note of there. He continued, "Large aerospace companies such as Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, etc. supply the technologies and components for the Air Force's secret space program. Consequently, the military-industrial complex / deep state has played a major role in setting space policy due to its ability to manipulate Air Force officials through the supply and acquisition process." This article is starting to sound more like an education piece than anything. In a series of books, Mr. Sala, that is Dr. Sala to you, has detailed what he describes as, quote, whistleblower insider claims, end quote, about secret space programs at the Pentagon, including a Navy operation in deep state with miles long, really it should be kilometers long, space carriers that use space marines as a fighting force. Kind of tiptoeing the line, not necessarily the case, but jeez! Navy operation that is Solar Warden, for those of you unfamiliar. William Tompkins comes to mind here. Dr. Sala wrote some books on William Tompkins. I've interviewed him before. And we have other whistleblowers, plenty of other evidence about that secret Navy space program. Plenty of evidence out there about the Air Forces as well. There's multiple programs. It's not a secret space program. There's multiple out there, black projects. So there you go, guys. Featuring Dr. Sala's work right there, featuring a couple of my tweets. You know, what's very intriguing to me before we move on into the latter half of this article is that they decided to use myself and Dr. Sala as the two people to quote here about UFO and secret space program research. Now, there are plenty of people out there that they could have quoted from and utilized their work with for this article, but what I find intriguing about Dr. Sala and I is that we're two individuals who you could say are in the UFO community and do a lot of work in regards to UFOs and secret space programs, and we don't shy away from talking about politics, talking about the deep state, and talking about QAnon. I, as you very well know, am a proponent of QAnon. I do plenty of work on Q. Dr. Sala as well is a proponent of QAnon, does plenty of work on Q, and also blends the lines. You see, Dr. Sala and I, we both blend the lines between the UFO secret space program topic and Q, because they are very much connected. Not very many people in the ufology community have the courage to do that. So I'm wondering if it was not an accident, if it was very purposeful for them to use Dr. Sala in I's names and works in here. Groundbreaking stuff. Moving on into the next paragraph. The outer reaches of the UFO community also believe that President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a secret treaty in 1954 with an alien race, also Nazi constituents, known as the Greys. The two sides agreed in the Greada Treaty not to interfere with each other's affairs. Also under the treaty, the Greys would share technology with the U.S., and the aliens would be allowed to abduct humans for various experiments, provided they submit the names of the abductees to a secret government committee known as Majestic 12. So that's sort of like a filler paragraph between the first half of this article and the second half, but, I mean, there's plenty of evidence for this. If you go read Dr. Sala's books, there's a huge amount of research around this affair, how Dwight D. Eisenhower met at Holloman Air Force Base, and he basically slipped out of a meeting he was supposed to be at to go to Holloman Air Force Base. There's multiple personal witness accounts to Dwight D. Eisenhower going to Holloman Air Force Base, and also there be saucer craft there at the Air Force Base waiting for him, and both humans and non-terrestrials there to meet him. So, again, there's a lot of research behind the lines that they're writing in this article, but it's stunning to see this in the mainstream start to break through. Now moving on into the latter half, the Trump administration described Space Force as a military branch charged with defending U.S. assets in space, such as satellites, and fending off cyber attacks. So now they're getting into more of a mainstream understanding of the Space Force to reiterate that to their reader. As I've often said, when it comes to secret space programs and what we actually have in space, it goes far beyond satellites and small craft like that. As this article stated earlier, kilometers long craft owned and operated by the Navy, the Air Force, DIA, NSA, and others. So, again, pandering to the mainstream audience here, kind of reiterating that to the readers. The Defense Department for years warned that the U.S. is unprepared for confrontation in space with Russia and China, which have been building capabilities to knock out satellites that are vital to communications, navigation, and intelligence. I actually like these lines right here because it's as if they're selling the idea to the Space Force, of the Space Force, to the public a little bit more so. As we know, the Space Force has had some opposition in being created, so I like that they're doing that they're selling the idea of the Space Force a little bit more so here. The Pentagon prefers to keep space operations within the Air Force. There you go. A draft of the Pentagon-backed legislation to establish the Space Force would organize it under the Air Force, similar to the way the Marines are organized under the Navy, according to a report by Defense News. Again, that bureaucratic opposition. The Trump administration and the White Hats are basically having to create a space command, a new combatant command, and might have to organize a Space Force under the Air Force instead of create its own separate sixth branch of the military, which I am much more for, but there's some sort of compromise that seems to be going on here. The president alone cannot create a military branch. It takes an act of Congress, though Mr. Trump has initiated the process, like I just mentioned with that new combatant command, the Space Command. Mr. Trump last week signed an order that established a Space Command to oversee the military's vast operations beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Wow. Military's vast operations beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Vast operations. Very subtle, but very important. The timing of Mr. Trump's original Space Force announcement added to the conspiracy fervor. It came on the heels of a New York Times report that revealed a secret Defense Department program that for at least 5 years investigated UFOs. The program allegedly shut down in 2012, but officials said they continued to investigate UFO episodes. So now we get into a little bit of the idea of full disclosure. It's very important that they put that in quotations and mention that at the beginning of this article, is because when it comes to that New York Times report revealing the secret DoD program, that and much more work I will do in the very near future discussing all of this, that, as I've said before, is what we could term as a limited hangout program, a partial disclosure, a half disclosure, not even a half disclosure, a minuscule percentage of disclosure to distract the public, to give them something shiny to look at while they brush the rest of their corruption and crimes, the deep state, under the rug. So, very intriguing that they're featuring Dr. Salah and I at the beginning of this article, outlining full disclosure, and then going into a little bit of the partial disclosure. Of course, this article doesn't mention that, but it somewhat kind of subconsciously puts that out there. And this New York Times report that revealed the secret DoD program, a little bit of dots to connect there very briefly. Again, I'll do much more work on this in the future, but that DoD report, some of the names involved in that: Harry Reid, John Podesta, Tom DeLonge, To the Stars Academy, promoting this DoD program. Just a lot of questionable individuals. So again, what's the motive behind this New York Times report that came out and that DoD program? And it actually wasn't secret at all. It was never officially classified. It's as if they created that program, ran it for 5 years, and purposefully left it declassified so they could bring it out to the public in the future as they did, right? Amazing stuff when you begin to piece it all together. There is also abundant evidence that the Pentagon has top secret operations in space, such as spy satellites. Satellites, okay. We know that. Of course there's secret spy satellites out there. Jan Harzan, executive director of the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, which has been investigating UFO sightings since 1969, noted the Air Force's unmanned X-37B spaceplane. It's been up there 2 years at a time doing classified missions, he said in an interview with the Washington Times. The X-37B, basically a space drone that resembles a small version of NASA's retired space shuttles, has flown clandestine missions in Earth's orbit since 2010. Jan Harzan goes on to say for the Washington Times here, "I don't really think the Space Force has anything to do with ETs or aliens. I know people are thinking it does. My personal opinion is that it is just that all the pieces of our military are doing the same thing, and there's probably some benefit of putting it all under one head." Mr. Harzan doubted the government was getting closer to, quote, full disclosure of what he believes the government hides about aliens. "I do believe that we have technology which has been reverse engineered from aircraft that are not from here, and that we are probably using that technology someplace. But are we trolling out amongst the stars like Star Trek or something else? I don't know that it has gotten that far," he said. And to finish up in the article, and then I'll give you my final notes, "Does Mr. Trump know the truth about extraterrestrial visitors?" Washington Times wrote, "I would be shocked if the president was not briefed," Mr. Harzan said. "How much they tell him, I have no clue." So in finishing up some comments about Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and Harzan's comments here. So what I find intriguing is that Harzan is kind of brushing this under the rug a little bit. He's saying, I don't know if it's gotten that far. He's kind of putting some plausible denying, But I find it intriguing that literally last year in 2017, the MUFON Symposium, the yearly big ol' conference that MUFON throws, was on the secret space program. That was the topic of it. They had speakers like Corey Goode and William Tompkins especially. I sat front row and watched William Tompkins. He was their keynote speaker there. William Tompkins, according to his testimony, he used to work in many of these secret think tanks. He used to design the initial stages of the spacecraft for that Navy Solar Warden program. Why would MUFON have a symposium dedicated to the secret space program with William Tompkins being their keynote speaker? They also had Gary McKinnon. He Skyped in, he patched himself in because he still lives over in the UK. He hacked NASA computers back in the year 2000 and found evidence of that Solar Warden secret Navy space program. So why would they have a whole symposium and all these speakers talking about all these things for Harzan to kind of brush under the rug? And what's also interesting to note is that MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, they have a lot of ties, a lot of connections to a corporation called Bigelow Aerospace. A corporation's run by billionaire Robert Bigelow. What else has Robert Bigelow done in the UFO realm? Well, actually, Bigelow Aerospace was the main contractor for that DoD program that the New York Times broke last year. Harry Reid was the one that initiated that program back in 2007, and then Bigelow Aerospace was the main contractor. So what's MUFON angle here? Is MUFON purposely trying to brush a lot of this under the rug? What is this limited hangout disclosure operation that the New York Times reported on and revealed about the ATIP, Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program? Again, Whew, this is good stuff. A lot more in the future, I will have to say, on these limited hangout operations and piece together for you guys. I'll probably do that on a whiteboard. But this article by the Washington Times, groundbreaking stuff. It's fantastic to see them talk about full disclosure, talking about secret space programs, discussing the idea of the Trump administration going head-to-head against the deep state regarding literally free energy, anti-gravity. They put those words in this article. They're talking about the cover-up of the ET presence, right? And again, goes to note, goes to reiterate here, mainstream outlet walking a fine line, kind of getting all sides of the piece. They are featuring Dr. Sala's work and my work, also talking to Jan Harzen from MUFON. So they're getting multiple opinions here, walking that fine line of bringing these ideas out to a mainstream, unaware audience who typically ridicules these and brushes it off. But dang, it's a great article. It's fantastic to see this stuff start to break loose. 2019, I think we're going to see a lot happen by way of all disclosure. Not just UFO, secret space program, free energy, anti-gravity disclosure, but QAnon disclosure, deep state exposure and disclosure. A lot of stuff, guys. And remember, this was written by their White House reporter. What are we going to see in 2019? Big stuff. Done.